What happens when the woman who just closed a $380 million hotel acquisition is forced to stand next to a man in a borrowed jacket at the most expensive gala of the year? A man every person in that room has already dismissed, mocked by name at the coat check, pointed at like a lesson in what doesn't belong, while having no idea that the engine running silently inside every car in the parking garage beneath their feet was his invention. The answer is not what she expected. The answer is not what anyone in that room expected. The answer was standing in the corner by the service entrance at 7:52 p.m. with a glass of water he hadn't touched, watching the room the way a man watches something he used to own and chose to put down. His name was Joel Price. He was wearing a jacket that didn't fit across the shoulders and shoes that were right, but not new. And if you had walked past him that night, and almost everyone did, you would have placed him in a category and kept walking. The category would have been wrong. It had been wrong every time for 11 years, and he had never once corrected it. Because the whole point of a quiet life is that it stays quiet. She was across the room in a dress that cost more than his truck, finishing a conversation with a man who ran a shipping conglomerate, and she had not yet seen him. She was 36 years old, and she had been the most powerful person in most rooms for 4 years running, and she knew exactly what her presence did to a room's geometry. She did not yet know that the geometry had already shifted. She did not yet know who had shifted it. She was about to find out, and the specific sound she would hear when she did, the low, involuntary intake of breath from the man beside her when the name was finally said aloud, was the sound of a room understanding, all at once, that it had made a very expensive mistake. Joel had been a mechanic in the technical sense for exactly 13 months of his adult life, which was how long it had taken him after graduate school to convince his first investor that a variable torque engine architecture could reduce fuel consumption in performance vehicles by 31% without touching horsepower. He had worked on the prototype in a rented bay in Providence because it was the only space he could afford, and because the work was the work and the location didn't matter. He still worked in a garage. He had just built a better one. The garage on Fenwick Road had been his father's, a 2-bay shop that smelled of 40-weight oil and burnt coffee that ran under the name Price and Sons for 31 years. Despite Joel being an only child, the Sons added as an act of optimism before he was born. Joel ran it as a working shop, not a front. He took appointments, he fixed cars. The men who dropped off their Porsches and Ferraris and vintage Alfa Romeos did not know, when they handed him the keys, that the company whose technology was embedded in their drivetrains had a market capitalization of $1.4 billion, and that the anonymous founder on the Delaware Incorporation documents was J.R. Price. There were 3 cars in the shop when he left. A 1966 Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint for a collector in Montreal, a pre-war Bentley from a Connecticut estate, and a 1971 Lamborghini Miura that a museum in Florence had been waiting 8 months for, its invoice beside a note in Maisie's handwriting that said, "Don't forget the thing tonight, Dad." He had almost forgotten the thing tonight. Maisie was 8. She had her mother's mouth and her father's patience, which was to say she waited for things the way good mechanics wait. Not impatiently, not passively, but with the focused readiness of someone who knows exactly what they're waiting for and is prepared to act the instant it arrives. She wore her hair in a single braid, and she carried a small green book everywhere, a spiral-bound notebook of car blueprints, pencil-drawn, precise, the kind of drawings that required a person to understand what they were drawing. Her mother had drawn every page. Sarah had been an automotive design engineer, and in the year before she died, she had filled that notebook drawing the inner workings of engines and gearboxes and suspension systems, and had told Maisie, "These are so we both know how beautiful things work." The notebook was her mother's. Maisie had memorized every page. She could identify an engine configuration by diagram at 8 years old, and she never showed off about it, which Joel considered her highest character achievement. The ticking clock had been ticking since March. A mechanic's lien had been filed against the Fenwick Road property by a holding company called Aldrin Solutions, claiming $67,000 in unpaid vendor services that Joel had never contracted and never received. The lien was fraudulent. His attorney had told him this clearly, and had also told him clearly that proving it in court would take time they did not have. The lien entitled Aldrin Solutions to force an auction of the property in 22 days if the amount wasn't paid or the lien wasn't voided. He had $67,000. He also had a daughter and a mortgage and a shop full of other people's irreplaceable cars, and he was not going to empty the account for a debt he didn't owe. He had told no one this except his attorney and the garage's exhaust vent, into which he had said several things his daughter would not have approved of. The Gala was the Ashworth Foundation's annual charity dinner, held in the Ashworth Grand on Commonwealth Avenue, which Diana owned along with 17 other properties across New England. Diana had not wanted to attend her own charity dinner. She had closed the Meridian Hotel acquisition that morning, $380 million, 17 months of negotiation. A deal requiring her to refinance 2 existing assets, restructure her senior debt facility, and convince 3 board members who had been wrong about her before that they were wrong again. She had done all of this before noon. She was tired in a way that money could not touch. The thing she could not fix was this. She was good at everything she did, and she was alone inside all of it. She had a mother who called on Sundays and a board that respected her and a full calendar. And she had built every floor of her life with intention, and the building was sound, and she lived in it alone, the way people live in architecturally perfect houses that have never been loud with anyone else's music. Joel was at the gala because a client, the estate attorney for the Connecticut Bentley, had sent the ticket as a thank you, and because Maisie had found the invitation on the kitchen counter and had said, "You should go somewhere nice, Dad. You always smell like the shop," which was not a criticism so much as an observation, and which had landed with the specific weight that observations from 8-year-olds tend to land. He had arrived at 7:45 and had been at the coat check at 7:47. When the man ahead of him in line had looked at his jacket and said, not quietly, "They're letting anyone in these days," which had been answered by a small ripple of laughter from the 3 people around him. Joel had handed over the jacket without looking at the man, and had accepted the ticket, and had walked into the room and found the corner by the service entrance, which was the correct strategic position. Good sightlines, nobody's elbow in your ribs, and close enough to the door to leave without a production. He had a glass of water he hadn't touched, and he was watching the room, and Diana Ashworth, across the room in a conversation she was finishing efficiently, had not yet seen him. The room's geometry had already changed. She just didn't know it yet. She saw him at 8:17, not because anyone pointed, nobody needed to. He was simply the only person in the room who was completely still, and she saw him the way she saw every room she entered, which was to say systematically, corner to corner, assigning values to what she saw. Jacket wrong in the shoulders. Shoes honest. Hands, she stopped at the hands. She crossed the room. Not immediately. She finished the shipping conglomerate conversation, accepted a glass of champagne she didn't intend to drink, and moved in his direction with the practiced, casual trajectory of someone who has been navigating rooms like this for 15 years. "You're not circulating," she said. "No," he said. "Everyone circulates." "I know." She waited for him to explain himself or ask who she was or perform the version of this conversation that the room expected. He didn't. He was looking at the far end of the space, where a line of vintage automobiles sat on a low platform as part of the evening's auction. A 1958 Ferrari 250, a Aston Martin DB5, a Jaguar E-Type in signal red, and his focus was not casual. His head was at a slight angle. "The E-Type," he said. "Rear subframe has been re-welded at the left mount point. You can see the heat discoloration from here. That color means an amateur torch, not factory. Someone will pay $190,000 for a car with a structural repair that isn't in the listing." She looked at the car. She could not see what he was describing. She looked back at him. "How can you see that from here?" He glanced at her for the first time. He did not answer the question directly. He said, "The lighting in this room is doing the car no favors. The shadow falls left at that angle, and the re-weld sits right at the edge of it. You'd have to know where to look." She had a question she had not decided to ask. It came out anyway. "Where did you—" She stopped. She looked at his hands. The left one had a scar, not a single line but a pattern. A dispersed burn across the back of the palm, and the first two knuckles, faded to silver white. The kind of scarring that comes from a specific kind of sustained heat exposure. She had seen that pattern exactly once before, in a photograph, in a profile piece she had read about Formula One pit crews. The piece had described a thermal event during a race in São Paulo in 2009. She had read the piece because one of her properties abutted a racing complex, and she had been doing due diligence. The question hung in the air between them, unfinished. He had not answered it. He was looking at the E-Type again, and she was looking at his hand, and the room moved around them the way rooms move around people who have found a still point inside the noise. She saw Maisie first, which was not the plan. The plan had been to hand Maisie off to the building's childcare suite and collect her at 10. But Maisie had the notebook open when Diana came to find Joel at the coat check to return a pen he had dropped. And she stopped in the doorway. Maisie was sitting on the low bench drawing. Not idly, she was copying something from the notebook into a fresh page, her tongue at the corner of her mouth, the blueprint reproduction precise enough that it would have passed for the original from 6 feet away. "That's a variable torque architecture," Diana said, before she thought about whether to say it. Maisie looked up. "You know what that is?" "I know what it does. I don't know how it works." Maisie studied her for a moment with the focused patience she had inherited from both parents. "My mom drew it," Maisie said. "She said if you understand how something works, you can never be fooled by someone pretending it doesn't." She held the notebook up, open to the diagram. "Dad built the real one, but Mom drew it first." Diana was very still. She looked at the diagram. She looked at the burn scar on Joel's left hand, visible where his sleeve had ridden up. She looked at the notebook. She had seen this diagram before. She had seen it in a trade publication, in an article about the Price variable torque engine in 2015, in a piece that described the founding of Price Automotive Holdings and included a reproduction of the original patent schematic. The schematic looked exactly like what was in Maisie's notebook. The schematic had been credited to the company's two co-founders, Joel R. Price and S.L. Price. S.L. Price. Sarah Louise. Joel had not moved. He was watching his daughter watch Diana process what she had just seen. He did not prompt Maisie. He did not offer context or cover. He waited the way he waited for everything, with the still readiness of someone who has learned that the truth arrives on its own schedule. Diana looked at him. She forgot what she had been about to say next. In 11 years of boardrooms and acquisition negotiations and conversations with people who were testing her at all times, she had forgotten what she was about to say, perhaps 3 times. This was the 4th. There was something inside her that had gone briefly, quietly off its regular footing, and she was aware of it, and she could not name what had caused it or where to put the awareness. And Maisie was handing the notebook to her and saying, "You can look if you want." Diana took the notebook. She held it carefully, the way people hold things that belong to someone else's grief. She was off balance in a way she would not have been able to explain to anyone in that room. She was tilted in a direction that felt, obscurely, like the correct direction. Philip Straight arrived at 9:03, announced by the sound of his own name being said warmly by 3 people at the entrance. He was that kind of man. The kind for whom rooms had been pre-warmed by the time he entered them. He was Diana's CFO, and had been for 6 years, and he ran her company's financing structure with the detailed authority of someone who understood that the person who controls the numbers controls the decisions, which was why he had been very careful, for 6 years, to control the numbers. He touched his tie before he spoke. Left hand to the knot, a small upward adjustment. Not because the tie needed adjusting, but because the gesture was his equivalent of clearing his throat, a preparation, a signal to himself that he was about to hold the floor. He did it whether he was addressing a board or a busboy. He found Diana with Joel, and he took in Joel with one practiced sweep and said, to Diana, not to Joel, which was itself a kind of statement. "They're putting the Ashworth table together. You'll want to come." Then to Joel, with the specific tone of a man who uses courtesy as a scalpel, "Are you staff? I don't think I've seen you at one of these before." Joel looked at him for one unhurried second. "The lien on the Fenwick Road property," Joel said. His voice had not changed register. "Filed March 12th by Aldrin Solutions, LLC, registered in Delaware 2 weeks before the filing, with a registered agent at 1407 Commerce Drive. The same address used by 3 other holding companies that have filed fraudulent mechanics liens against independent garage owners in this state in the past 18 months, all of which trace back to the same 2 authorization signatures. One of those signatures belongs to the manager of Aldrin Solutions. The other one matches the signatory on your personal Tidewater Capital account, which processed a $14,000 consulting payment to the Aldrin registered agent on March 8th, 4 days before my lien was filed." He paused. "The Attorney General's office has a standing investigation into coordinated lien fraud in commercial real estate. They've been looking for the second signature for 7 months." Stratt's hand went to his tie. He stopped it. His hand rested at his side. "I don't know what you think you're—" "You should go," Joel said. He said it the way he said everything, at the same speed, in the same register, with the same complete absence of performance. He picked up his glass of water, the one he hadn't touched all evening, and he took a drink. He set it back down. He turned back to look at the auction cars. Strate looked at Diana. Diana's face gave him nothing. He did not compose a parting shot. He did not straighten his tie. He turned and walked toward the exit, and the room noticed, the way rooms notice when a person leaves faster than they arrived, and then the room moved on, the way rooms do, and he was gone. He did not look back. He did not come back. Diana did not speak for a long time. She stood beside Joel in the corner by the service entrance, and she did not speak, and the Gala moved around them, the auction beginning at the far end, the auctioneer's voice counting up in $30,000 increments toward a car that had a structural repair, not in the listing. And she looked at the side of Joel's face, and she was quiet with the specific silence of someone who has just watched a man dismantle something that was threatening her world, without announcing himself, without requiring thanks. She went looking for the answer herself the next morning, with her own attorney, her own files, no assumptions. She pulled the Aldrin Solutions registration. She pulled the Tidewater account filings. She ran the signatory match against 6 months of her company's authorized payments and found what she had been afraid she would find. Strate had been running the lien scheme through her subsidiaries for 14 months. 3 garages had been forced out of their properties. The proceeds had flowed through 3 shell accounts into a property acquisition fund that Strate controlled personally. She called Joel at 7 a.m. She said, "I found all of it." She said, "I'm sorry." He said nothing for a moment, and then he said, "I know you didn't know." She drove to the garage on Fenwick Road that Saturday. She parked the car on the street, and she looked at the sign, Price and Sons, and she sat there for a moment before she went in, because she was trying to prepare herself, and she was not sure what she was preparing for. She found him under a Lamborghini. She recognized it, the Miura, 1971, the car she had seen a photograph of in her father's library 20 years ago, the car her father had called the most beautiful machine ever built before he sold everything to cover his debts. She had not thought about her father's library in years. She did not know why she was thinking about it now. "Your wife co-founded the company," she said, when he rolled out from under the car. It was not a question. "She did the first 3 patent filings," he said. He sat up. He took the rag off his shoulder and wiped his hands in the way of someone who does not rush the next sentence. "She was the better engineer. I was better at the business side. We'd been running it for 4 years when she died." Diana waited. "The brake failure wasn't random," he said. "The component that failed, the rear caliper housing on the driver's side, was a part supplied by a company called Veritech Industrial. Veritech had a supplier contract with a private equity vehicle that Strate ran before he came to work for you. He authorized a cost reduction in the housing spec to increase margins. The component that went into her car was 3 tolerances below the published standard." He set the rag down. "I've known this for 6 years. I've been building the evidentiary file for 3. The lien on this property was him trying to remove me before I finished it." Diana stood in the garage door. Afternoon light came in behind her and laid itself across the concrete floor and the tools on the wall and the Miura's impossibly clean flanks. She had not chosen Strate. She had inherited him from a CFO transition, had run him through every standard check, had found nothing because he had been careful and because the people checking had been checking the right records in the wrong order. She had not known. But he had operated inside the structure she built, and the structure had given him cover, and that was not the same as innocence. She understood this without him saying it, and she understood that he understood that she understood, and that he had not told her this to make her feel responsible. He had told her because she had asked, and he answered the questions people asked him. That was the whole of it. She looked at the Miura. She looked at the notebook on the workbench, Maisie's green book, open to a diagram of a braking system, the components labeled in a child's careful handwriting, the original pencil lines of a woman who had wanted to understand how beautiful things work. She stood there until she was ready to speak. He waited. He was very good at waiting. Strate had 1 move left, and he played it on day 18. 4 days before the auction deadline, with the specific confidence of a man who has always had one more move than the people watching him. He filed a motion in Suffolk County Superior Court, arguing that the lien was valid under a subclause of the Massachusetts Commercial Property Code that allowed vendor claims to survive documentary challenges for 90 days, which would push the auction past the AG's investigation timeline and give him enough space to dissolve Aldrin Solutions and walk away clean. His attorney had found the subclause. It was real. It was narrow. It had never been tested against a coordinated fraud pattern. What he did not know was that Joel had spent 3 years building an evidentiary file that included the Veritech supplier contract, the cost reduction authorization, the component failure report, the brake caliper housing spec sheets, and a chain of payments connecting Strate's private equity vehicle to Veritech's parent company. A chain that the Attorney General's office had been trying to complete for 7 months. What he did not know was that Diana Ashworth had spent the previous 10 days turning her company's internal records over to the AG's office voluntarily, with her own outside counsel present. Because when she understood the scope of what had been running through her subsidiaries, she had called the AG's office herself and said, "I have everything you need, and I will hand it to you, and I will not require a subpoena." What Strate did not know was that the AG's office had filed a coordinated fraud charge at 8 a.m. that morning, before his own motion reached the clerk's window, and that the charge suspended all lien proceedings pending criminal review, and that there were 2 investigators from the AG's Financial Crimes Unit waiting in the parking lot of his office building when he arrived that morning to submit the filing. He pulled into his parking space. He could see them through the windshield. He touched his tie, left hand to the knot, the upward adjustment, the preparation gesture, the signal to himself that he was about to hold the floor. His hand fell. The investigators walked toward the car, and the parking lot was quiet in the morning cold. He sat for 17 seconds. How long it took him to understand that there was no version of the next 5 minutes that went the way the previous 5 years had gone, and then he opened the door. He looked like a man who had spent years confusing a long winning streak for something permanent. One investigator read the charges. The other handed him a copy of the filing. The charges included coordinated lien fraud, criminal conversion of corporate assets, and negligent homicide in connection with the Veritech component failure, a charge that had been waiting 6 years for a complete evidentiary chain. The chain was now complete. He said nothing. He had no last line. The investigators did not leave room for one. Across the city, in the garage on Fenwick Road, Joel was on the phone with his attorney at the moment the lien suspension came through, and he heard it in his attorney's voice before she finished the sentence. The specific shift in cadence that means the thing you have been fighting is finally, actually over. And he sat down on the step stool he kept beside the Mayura, and he did not move for a while. His hands were still. He set his phone down. He picked up the rag. He set the rag back down. The auction would not happen. The garage was his. Diana was there by 10. She did not announce herself. She parked on the street, and she walked in, and she found him where she had found him before, in the garage, in the light, working. And she stood in the doorway. And when he looked up, she did not say, "I told you." She did not say, "It's over." She just stood there, and he looked at her face, and what he saw on it was something she had not shown a room in a very long time, something uncalculated, unperformed, the specific expression of a person who has stopped managing their own appearance, because the person they're looking at doesn't require the performance. He recognized it because he had been living outside performance for 11 years. and he knew what it looked like when someone else found their way to the same place. 1 year later, Maisie had started bringing the notebook to school on Fridays, Living Blueprints Day, her teacher called it, where students explained how real things worked, drawn and narrated. She had explained a variable torque engine to 23 8-year-olds in October, using drawings her mother had made before she was born, and her teacher had sent Joel a note. Your daughter has a gift for making complicated things feel inevitable. He put it in the drawer with the things he wanted to keep. The garage on Fenwick Road had a third bay added in January, built by Joel himself on weekends. The Miura had shipped to Florence. The Delahaye was on the lift now, sent by a collector in Geneva. On the wall where the Aldrin Solutions lien notice had been taped for 3 months, there was a drawing, pencil, precise signed S.L. Price, a braking system, components labeled, framed by Maisie, hung with his permission, nothing else needing to be said about it. Diana's office on the 41st floor had a door that was open more often than it used to be. Her assistant had noticed this and had not commented because it was not her business to comment on the geometry of doors. But she had noticed. Diana had noticed that her assistant had noticed and had felt something she did not have a clean word for, which she had decided was fine. Some things didn't need words. They just needed to be true. She was in the garage on a Saturday in November, sitting on the step stool beside the Delahaye while Joel worked. Maisie between them on the floor with the notebook open and a fresh pencil in her hand, copying something from the blueprint on the wall. His hand rested on the fender of the car near where Diana was sitting, not on her hand, just near it. The way two things come to rest in proximity when neither one is planning to move. She had not moved it. He had not moved it. Maisie had looked up once, at both of them, and had looked back at her drawing without saying anything, which was its own kind of comment. I'm going to call you both here, Maisie said after a moment, to no one in particular. She said it the way she said true things, as a report, not a request. Neither of them answered right away. Neither moved the hand. The things worth building take time, and the things worth holding are usually the ones that hold you back, quietly, without asking for credit. The way a good engine holds a gear. The way a blueprint holds a mind. The way a garage holds a life that chose to stay small so it could stay true. If you had been in that gala the night they humiliated the man in the wrong jacket, and you later found out what was in his pocket, what was in his name, what was in his file, would you have been the one who looked away or the one who looked closer? We want to know. Share this with someone who has learned that the quietest people in the room are worth the most attention. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And leave us your answer. We read everyone.